Hi there, welcome to my YouTube channel Dhyani Classes. If you are watching my video for the first time, do subscribe my channel, hit the bell icon so that you get notified whenever new video will be uploaded. So in today's video, we'll cover the first part of the chapter 2 story about flying, his first flight, written by Liam Flaherty from class 10 CBSE. So let's get started. Let's talk about the author. His first flight is written by Liam Flaherty and he was born on 20th August 1896 in County Galway, Ireland. He was an Irish novelist and short story writer and one of the foremost socialist writers in the first part of the 20th century, writing about the common people's experience and from their perspective. So this is a very beautiful story written by Liam Flaherty and talks about a bird, a small bird, seagull, who was very frightened to fly, and all his family members including the siblings and his parents tried to make it fly, but their effort did not work at all because he was so scared. So this seagull decided to remain on his ledge because he was so frightened and did not try to fly. So through the lesson, we will see how this bird overcome to fear to fly and how he gathered his confidence to make his first flight. So let's understand the first part of the chapter with line by line explanation. The young seagull was alone on his ledge. So here the author is talking about the young seagull and he was alone on his ledge. So what do you mean by ledge? That means a long narrow horizontal surface projecting from a wall, cliff or another surface where all the birds used to sit and from there used to fly and would sleep at night. So there was a hole where this young seagull was sitting alone and he was afraid because he had to make his first flight, and says his two brothers and sister had already flown away the day before. So this seagull used to live with his family, and just the day before his two brothers and sister had already flown away and it was his turn to make it fly. But he had been afraid to fly with them. So this seagull was too afraid to fly because he went first time near the edge of the sea to make his first flight, and says somehow when he had taken a little run forward to the brink of the ledge and attempted to flap his wings, he became afraid. So here he is saying that this young seagull finally decided to make his first flight, but then he ran towards the brink of the ledge, that means the top of the cliff, and attempted to flap his wings, that means he tried to fly from the edge of the cliff, but then he became afraid, that means he was not able to make his first flight because he got frightened and did not fly. Further he says the great expanse of sea stretched down beneath and it was such a long way down, miles down. So here he is saying that this seagull was very afraid and the birds were sitting on the top of a cliff, and when he looked down from the cliff he saw a great expanse of sea and it was miles down, and while looking down he got frightened because it was one of the top hill of the sea and she was looking miles and miles down from there, and then he was feeling frightened because from there he had to make his first flight. So beneath means under or below and stretched means longer or wider, and says he felt certain that his wings would never support him. So the bird tried many times to fly because he wanted to fly just like his brothers and sister and would try to fly, but then looking at the height of the cliff or looking at the expanse of the sea, he would always feel scared every time, and when he was trying to fly he was thinking that his wings would never support him. That means he would always believe that his wings will not support him when he will jump from the height, and says so he bent his head and ran away back to the little hole under the ledge where he slept at night. So here he is saying that as he was so frightened, and even after many attempts he did not fly because he was so frightened and he would believed that his wings would never support him, and on the other hand he was also frightened to see the great expanse of the sea. So whenever he tried to fly from the edge of the cliff, this fear would come and then he would come back from the edge, and then finally he bent his head and went back to the little hole under the ledge and started thinking about his first flight and how he was not able to fly and all. So bent means twisted or curved. Even when each of his brothers and his little sister, whose wings were far shorter than his own, ran to the brink, flapped their wings, and flew away, he failed to muster up courage to take that plunge which appeared to him so desperate. So here he is saying that even when each of his brothers and his little sister, that means his brothers and his sister, used to come to the ledge to make him eager to fly, because they wanted to show him how happy they are while flying, and whose wings were far shorter than his own. That means his sister even had smaller wings as compared to him, but she would fly without any difficulties and would enjoy her flight with her two brothers. But this seagull was feeling so frightened to fly, and when his brothers and sister used to come to the ledge, they used to run to the brink, flapping their wings, and flew away. That means his two brothers and sister, one after another, used to run towards the edge of the cliff with flapping their wings, and then flew away from there. So they wanted to show him how they were flying from the edge of the cliff, and then so that he can also fly. But he always fails to muster up the courage to take the plunge. That means they were trying to boost or improve his confidence to make the jump from the cliff, and wanted to make him desperate to fly. That means they wanted to make him eager to fly, but in the end he did not have the courage and would feel frightened and did not fly at all. So desperate means wanting something badly. His father and mother had come around, calling to him shrilly, upbraiding him, threatening to let him starve on his ledge unless he flew away. So here the author is saying that his father and mother had come around. That means his father and mother used to come to meet him on his ledge and call him shrilly. That means in a loud voice, and upbraiding him, that means scolding him out loud, because he was so frightened to fly, and threatening to let him starve on his ledge unless he flew away. So his parents tried everything, such as scolding him, threatening him, and even used to tell him that if you don't fly, they will not give him any food. But this seagull kept himself inside the hole and did not come out of the hole, because he was so frightened and would believe that when he will try to fly, his wings will not support him and then he will fall down, and says, but for the life of him he could not move. So this seagull was so scared and did not move out of the hole and never tried to fly, and says that was 24 hours ago. So it was almost one day when his parents came to see him and started shouting at him and scolding him because he was afraid to fly. And then after many efforts, his parents threatened him, if you are not going to fly, or if you will not come out of the ledge, we will not give you any food. And then his parents flew away from there. Further he says, since then nobody had come near him. So here he is saying that 24 hours had passed, but nobody from his family had come to see him, and says the day before, all day long, he had watched his parents flying about with his brothers and sister. So as he was feeling frightened and did not come out of the ledge, and from there he was watching his parents and brother and sister, what they were doing, and how parents were teaching his brothers about flying, and what their parents were teaching his brothers and sister, perfecting them in the art of flight, teaching them how to skim the wave and how to dive for fish. So the parents were teaching their children the art of flying, such as how to fly smoothly in the air, or how to skim the waves. That means how to go or move quickly and lightly over the surface, or how to fly when it comes to heavy wind and all. And then the parents also teaching them how to dive for fish. That means how to catch the fish from the sea or the water, so that they can get their food by themselves. So this seagull kept watching his parents and siblings from the ledge. He had in fact seen his older brother catch his first herring and devour it. So as he was watching his brothers and sister very attentively from the ledge, and later on he had seen his older brother that he had catch his first herring, that means a fish, and devour it. That means his older brother swallowed a fish, and says, standing on a rock while his parents circled around raising a proud cackle. So his parents were standing in front of his older brother, and they were standing on a rock, and when his older brother devoured a fish, his parents praised him out loud because he was able to catch the fish. Further he says, and all the morning the whole family had walked about on the big plateau midway down the opposite cliff, taunting him with his cowardice. So here he is saying that on the opposite side there was one more cliff and there was a plateau. That means there was a flat surface, and on this surface his whole family was standing, and then they all started taunting him with his cowardice. That means his parents and brothers and sister started teasing or making fun of him, how frightened and timid he was, and all they were standing on the opposite on a big surface of the cliff and making fun of him because he was so frightened, and even he was not able to see heights from the above, and whenever he tried to fly he immediately comes back to his ledge because he was thinking that his wings would not support him. So cowardice means weaknesses and lack of bravery. And says the sun was now ascending the sky, blazing on his ledge that faced the south. So it was a sunny day and the sun was coming down, and it was also a very hot day, and the little seagull was sitting inside the ledge on the top of the cliff. He felt the heat because he had not eaten since the previous nightfall. So here this seagull had not eaten anything for the last 24 hours, and then he started feeling very hot because it was a sunny day, and as he was feeling hungry and feeling hot, he stepped slowly out to the brink of the ledge. So the little bird decided to come out from the ledge, and very slowly he started coming to the brink of the ledge. That means he started moving towards the edge of the large surface, and says, and standing on one leg with the other leg hidden under his wing, and he closed one eye then the other and pretended to be falling asleep. So when he reached the edge of the surface standing on one leg with the other leg hidden under his wing, that means he stood there with one leg and another hiding under his wing, and closed one eye and making fool his parents or showing them as if he was feeling sleepy. Further he says, still they took no notice of him. So here as he was standing on the edge of the surface and just pretending that as if he was sleeping, and he was doing this thing only so that his parents would come and give him something to eat because he was feeling so hungry, and his parents did not notice him, that why he came out of the ledge. And says he saw his two brothers and his sister lying on the plateau dozing with their heads sunk into their necks. So later on the opposite plateau, he saw his two brothers and sister laying on the plateau dozing. That means his brothers and sister were sleeping on the plateau with their heads sunk into their necks. That means their heads were under his necks or under their necks, and they were taking rest. And says his father was beating the father on his white back. So his father was also there on the same plateau, and he was peeing the father. That means he was cleaning his father's on his white back. Only his mother was looking at him, so nobody was noticing him as his siblings were sleeping, and his father was busy in cleaning his father's, and only his mother was looking at him, and she got to know that he wanted them to look at him and give him some food. But on the other hand, his parents already decided that they will not give him any food, as they threatened him earlier that he will not get any food until he will fly. And says she was standing on a little high hump on the plateau, her white breast thrust forward. So his mother was standing on a little high hump on the plateau. That means she was standing on a rounded raised mass of plateau, and her white breast thrust forward. That means her front part of the body was pushed forward a bit, because now and again she tore at a piece of fish that lay at her feet, and then scraped each side of her beak on the rock. So while standing on a little high hump, she tore at a piece of fish that lay at her feet. That means there was a piece of fish under her feet, and she was eating it bit by bit, and then scraped each side of her beak on the rock. That means she was rubbing her beak again and again on the rock, just because of she wanted to attract the attention of the little frightened seagull towards the piece of fish, because she knew he was feeling hungry. So scrapped means clear out or remove. Further he says the sight of the food maddened him. So the mother seagull was trying to attract him, and she knew that if she shows him food, he would feel more hungry, and then he will try to fly. So the sight of the food maddened him. That means he was looking at the food, and as he was feeling very hungry, and then the food made him mad. And says how he loved to tear food that way, scraping his beak now and again to wet it. So this little bird was feeling so hungry, and he loved to tear food that way. That means he also wanted to tear that fish as his mother was doing, and says scrubbing his beak now and again to wet it. That means he also wanted to move its beak just like his mother, and was moving her beak from one side to another on a rock in order to make it sharper. So he also liked to do it that way, and wanted to tear the piece of food just like his mother. And then ga ga ga, he cried, begging her to bring him some food. So while seeing a piece of fish, he couldn't control his hunger and he started calling his mother ga ga ga. That means he wanted to tell her to bring it to him and give it to him because he was feeling so hungry. And says gao ko ah, she screamed back derisively. So in the same way, his mother also replied to him in a funniest manner and started making fun of the little seagull. Further, he says he kept calling plaintively, and after a minute or so, he uttered a joyful scream. So here he is saying that this little seagull kept calling plaintively. That means he was calling his mother very sadly because he was so hungry and he had not eaten anything for the past 24 hours. And then after a minute or so, he uttered a joyful scream. That means after some time, suddenly he started feeling happy and screaming happily out loud because his mother had picked up a piece of the fish and was flying across to him with it. So he was screaming out loud in happiness because his mother had picked up a piece of the fish. That means his mother took a piece of fish, as he was calling his mother very sadly, and his mother was flying towards him with the piece of fish. And then he became very happy and says he leaned out eagerly, tapping the rock with his feet, trying to get nearer to her as she flew across. So when his mother came closer to him, as she was flying over it, and she was trying to make him fly to catch the piece of the fish from her beak, and then he was trying to get nearer to her as she flew across. That means she started to bend or move forward, tapping the rock with his feet. So he was trying to catch the fish when his mother was coming nearer to him. But when she was just opposite to him, she halted, her wings motionless, the piece of fish in her beak almost within reach of his beak. So here the author is saying that when she was just opposite to him, that means when his mother came closer from behind, she halted, her wings motionless. That means she was fluttering in the air and just stopped and did not fly, and she just stood in the air for some time. And says the piece of fish in her beak almost within the reach of his beak. That means a piece of fish that his mother was carrying was very near to the bird seagull, but she did not give him to eat that piece of fish because she wanted to make him fly, and stopped there for some time. And says he waited a moment in surprise, wondering why she did not come nearer, and then, maddened by hunger, he dived at the fish. So as his mother came very near to him carrying a piece of fish, but she did not give him to eat, and he waited for a moment in surprise. That means he thought for a moment that why his mother is not giving him food, and why she is standing near him with her motionless wings, and she is wondering why she did not come nearer. That means he was also thinking why she is not coming nearer to him to give him food. And then, maddened by hunger, he dived at the fish. That means after seeing a piece of fish in his mother's beak, he could not control his hunger, and then he forgot everything and started moving towards his mother to get that fish madly. Further, he says with a loud scream, he fell outwards and downwards into space. So here he is saying that this seagull started shouting out loud because he fell outwards and downwards into space. That means when he tried to catch the fish from his mother's beak, he forgot everything about fear of flying and all, because he was feeling hungry and couldn't control his hunger, and dived towards his mother, and then fell out downwards into space. And says then a monster terror seized him and his heart stood still. So when he fell downwards into the space, he was floating in the air, and then a monster terror seized him. That means a dangerous and scary terror took a hold of him, and his heart stood still. That means he was not able to breathe properly, and he was feeling very frightened because it was the first time when he jumped into space. And says he could hear nothing. So due to fear, he could not able to hear anything, even though his mother was also screaming, but he was not able to hear anything. And says but it only lasted a minute. So when this bird was falling down and down, he was feeling very frightened, but it only lasted a minute. That means he felt frightened just for a moment, because the next moment he felt his wings spread outwards. So the next moment everything was fine, and suddenly his wings spread outwards automatically, and then he felt relaxed because he was not going down anymore, and his wings started supporting him while flying in the air. The wind rushed against his breast feathers, then under his stomach and against his wings. So when this seagull was in the air, he felt the wind was blowing, and the wind was touching all parts of his body, such as his breast feathers, his stomach, and especially his wings, and says he could feel the tips of his wings cutting through the air. That means he started flying and moving his wings, and then he could feel the tips of his wings cutting through the air. That means he could feel in the air his wings flapping automatically. So he was flying smoothly, effortlessly, and following his mother because he was very hungry and wanted to eat that piece of fish, and says he was not falling headlong now. So now he understood that his wings are going to support him and flying in the air, and now he was not falling headlong. So headlong means head going down first, and says he was soaring gradually downwards and outwards. So now he was able to fly in the air, and sometime he was going down and sometime upward in the air with his mother. Further, he says he was no longer afraid. So when he was flying in the air, he got to know that he is not going to fall, and then he gathered confidence and all his fear vanished, and he was no longer afraid, and says he just felt a bit dizzy. So while flying he felt a bit dizzy, that means he felt sleepy, and then he flapped his wings once and he soared upwards. So he gathered courage, and then he started flapping his wings and moving up and down in the air fearlessly, and then he started flying upwards, and then his mother started screaming ga 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 kol a. His mother sobbed past him, her wings making a loud noise. So his mother was very happy to see him while flying, and she was making noise and calling his entire family to fly with a little bird, and she was also flying along with him, and says he answered her with another scream. So when he saw his mother was screaming, then the little bird also answered back to her mother with another scream in order to let her know that he is no more frightened. And then his father flew over him, and his parents were very happy to see him, and they started flying with him. Then his father flew over him screaming. So here his father and mother flew over him screaming happily, because they were so happy to see the little birds flying, because earlier he was not able to come out from the ledge, and now he was able to fly along with his parents without any difficulties. And says he saw his two brothers and his sister flying around him, coveting and banking and soaring and diving. So during taking his first flight, he saw his two brothers and his sister flying around him. That means he saw his siblings were also flying with him, and praised him out loud, and how his sister and brothers were flying. They were flying around him, coveting. That means they were jumping up and down in the air, and banking. That means they were also changing their position and angling with the wings towards the one's direction to another. And then soaring and diving. That means his brother and sister were flying towards the sky without moving their wings, and then coming down towards the sea without moving the wings to get fish from the water. So this is how they were showing him that how to fly and how to catch the fish. And says then he completely forgot that he had not always been able to fly, and commanded himself dive and soar and curve, shrinking shrilly. So when this seagull was flying with his entire family and learning how to fly, he completely forgot that he had not once been able to fly. That means he just forgot everything, as earlier he was so frightened and believed that his wings would not support him. And says and commanded himself to dive and soar and curve, shrinking shrilly. That means now he can command his wings as per his wish, and now he can got up and dive down, and he can move left and right using his wings, shrinking shrilly. That means making with loud noise, was able to fly across the sky. Further, he says he was near the sea now, flying straight over it, facing straight out over the ocean. So here the author is saying that now this little seagull was able to fly easily and he was near the sea now. That means after diving up and down and moving left and right with his brothers and sister, then he dives down towards the sea and now he was near the sea. That means he was flying just over the sea water and she is flying straight over it. That means he was just flying over the sea water as if he was searching for fish to eat and facing straight out over the ocean. That means he was looking down towards the sea while flying, just like his parents and siblings used to fly in search of food. And says he saw a vast green sea beneath him with little ridges moving over it, and he turned his beak sideways and cawed amusedly. So while flying just over the sea, he saw a vast green beneath him. That means he saw a very deep and broader sea under him with little ridges moving over it. That means he saw there were small waves of water in the sea, and then he turned his beak sideways and cawed amusedly. So finally he moved from one side to another and made a very loud noise because he was very happy, because he was no more frightened. His parents and his brothers and sister had landed on this green flooring ahead of him. So here, as he was flying just over the sea behind his parents, and then his parents and brothers and sister had landed on this green flooring. That means his parents and siblings jumped into the surface of the water. And why they landed into the water? Because they wanted to teach him how to jump into the water for catching the fish. So green flooring means surface of the water or top level of the water, and says they were beckoning to him, calling shrilly. So when he saw his entire family was on the surface of the water, his parents were beckoning to him, calling shrilly. That means they were calling him with a high pitched noise to come closer to them, or telling him to land on the surface of the water. So shrilly means loudly or high pitched sound, and says he dropped his leg to stand on the green sea. So as his family beckoning to him, and then he also jumped into the surface of the water and his legs to stand in the sea. So now he was on the surface of the water along with his family, and says his legs sank into it. That means when he stand on the green sea or sat on the top of the water, he started moving downwards into the water. He screamed with fright and attempted to rise again, flapping his wings. So as his legs were sinking into the water, and then he screamed with fright. That means again he started crying because he was feeling frightened, and then he attempted to rise again, flapping his wings. That means again he was trying to flap his wings to fly out from the surface of the water. So attempted means to trying to do something that is difficult to do, and screamed means crying out loud. And says but he was tired and weak with hunger, and he could not rise, exhausted by the strange exercise. So while flapping his wings, he was tired and weak with hunger. That means while flapping his wings, he was a little bit tired and weak because he had not eaten anything for the past 24 hours. And on the other hand, he was practicing this strange exercise of flying in the sky, and due to this he could not able to fly from the surface of the water. And says his feet sank into the green sea, and then his belly touched it, and he sank no further. So he was exhausted and frightened, and when his feet were sinking into the water, then his belly touched it and he sank no further. That means his lower part of the body touched the water and he was no longer drowning in the water. Further he says he was floating on it, and around him his family was screaming, freezing him, and their beaks were offering him scraps of dogfish. So here finally this little bird was floating on the surface of the water, and around him his family was screaming. That means his parents and siblings were there with him and shouting out loud because they were so happy to see him. And what they were doing around him, they were praising him, and other beaks were offering scraps of dogfish. That means his whole family came closer to him and cheered him all around because they were very happy to see the little bird, how he was floating on the surface of the water. And on the other hand, he also learned how to fly and dive up and down in the air, and his parents were giving him scraps of dogfish. That means a piece of dogfish, because he was so hungry. So the whole family cheered the little seagull and says he had made his first flight. So finally he made his first flight successfully, and now no longer he is frightened, and he was able to overcome the fear and showed courage to fly along with his family without any difficulty, and he was able to fly for the first time. So in this way the narrator is saying that he had made his first flight. So moral of the story is, all we have to fear is fear itself. That means once you get frightened, you will set a different mindset to think about it, and then that mindset will be called fear, and it will not help you what you want to do in your life. And once you will be able to find out the solution of it, you will be able to move further in life with courage and confidence. Let's look at the second part of the chapter, the black aeroplane. The black aeroplane story is a very interesting story. It also has some amount of mystery in it. Now, this is a story about a pilot who was able to reach his home safely in the midst of a storm. So the lesson also teaches us about not losing hope at any point in time. So let's move on the chapter now. The moon was coming up in the east behind me, and stars were shining in the clear sky above me. So here the narrator is saying that the moon was coming up in the east. That means the narrator was flying his aircraft in the night, and the moon was rising up in the east behind me, and says stars were shining in the sky, or shining in the clear sky above me. So he saw the moon and the stars all around the sky, and at that time he was alone up in the sky, and says there wasn't a cloud in the sky. That means the sky was very clear with the moon and the stars, and there wasn't a cloud in the sky, and I was happy to be alone high up above the sleeping countryside. So the narrator was flying aircraft alone in the sky, and he was very happy to be alone in the sky because the sky was very clear with the stars all around, and says he was flying aircraft above the sleeping countryside. So what do you mean by sleeping countryside? That means the village side, and all people were sleeping at that time, and he was flying the aircraft alone in the sky. Further he says, I was flying my old Dakota aeroplane over France back to England. So here he is saying that he is talking about the model name of his aircraft, and it was an old Dakota aeroplane which he was flying over France back to England. That means he was going from France to England in the night all alone, and says I was dreaming of my holiday and looking forward to being with my family. So he was very happy and excited to meet his family, and he was dreaming of my holiday. That means he wanted to celebrate holidays with his family and enjoy with them. So that's why he was so happy and excited to meet his family, and says I looked at my watch on 30 in the morning. So later on he looked at his watch, and he saw it was 1:30 in the morning. I should call Paris control soon, I thought. So as he was alone in the sky flying his old Dakota aeroplane over France back to England, and then a thought came to his mind that he should call Paris control soon. That means he thought he has to deliver his message to Paris control. So what do you mean by Paris controls here? That means a control room is a place, a big booth or an airport from which instructions are given to aircraft when they are taking off or landing, and this control room are responsible for controlling aircraft flying in the airspace. So in the same way, the narrator had to give some information to the Paris control room to know more about the landing of the aircraft at the airport, and says as I looked down past the nose of the airplane, I saw the lights of a big city in front of me. So when he thought I should call Paris control room, he looked down the nose of the airplane. That means he looked at the tip of the aeroplane, and he saw the lights of a big city in front of him. So as he looked down from the aeroplane, he could see the big city, and he could see the lights were shining all around the city in front of him, and says I switched on the radio and said Paris control Dakota DS088 here. So here he switched on the wireless radio and said Paris control Dakota DS088 here. That means he started delivering a message to the Paris control room. So Dakota 088 is the code he used for landing and taking off his plane. Can you hear me? I'm on my way to England, over. So he is asking them, can you hear me? And says I am on my way to England. That means he informed Paris control room that he is flying to England. So this was the message he wanted to give Paris control, and says the voice from the radio answered me immediately, DS088, I can hear you. So when he delivered his message through the wireless radio, he got an answer from the Paris control room that yes, we can hear you DS088, and gave him instruction that you ought to turn 12° west now, DS088 over. So he got a response from the control room, and the operator gave him instruction that he ought to turn 12° west now. That means he should turn 12° west, and then he disconnected the line by saying 88 DS088 over. Further he says, I checked the map and the compass, switched over to my second and last fuel tank, and turned the Dakota 12° west towards England. So here he is saying that after getting instructions from the control room, I checked the map and the compass. That means immediately he looks at the map and then he looks at the compass as well to know more about his position and direction. So compass is a device is used for checking the direction, and says switched over my second and last fuel tank. That means he had little fuel in it and it was the last fuel tank that he was switching over. And then look at the compass, he turned his Dakota aeroplane 12° towards the west as per the given instruction by the Paris control room, and says, I'll be in time for breakfast, I thought. So he thought he would be able to reach on time in London and would meet his family and have breakfast with them. So he was very happy while thinking about all this because he was so excited to see his family. A good big English breakfast. Everything was going well. It was an easy flight. So here he thought that he would enjoy a good big English breakfast. So what is good English breakfast? Good English breakfast is a meal that is eaten in the morning and consists of a lot of fried food, toast, eggs, meat, tea, coffee, and other soft drink as well. So he was very excited to meet his family and have a good big English breakfast with them, and says everything was going well. That means he was flying towards England in thinking that he will meet his family and have breakfast with them, and it was an easy flight. That means he did not face any challenges or difficulties during his journey towards England. So he was flying towards England without any difficulty, and says Paris was about 150 kilometers behind me when I saw the clouds. So as he was flying plane very easily and smoothly, and he had already moved on 50 kilometers from Paris towards London, but when he looked back for a moment, there was a cloud. That means he noticed some kind of clouds in the sky, and says storm clouds. They were huge. So he saw big storm clouds behind him, and they were looking very scary in the sky, and he felt that these huge clouds were going to make a big storm from behind him. So this is what he noticed when he saw behind for a moment while flying towards the London. They looked like a black mountains standing in front of me across the sky. So here he has seen huge and scary clouds, and it looked like a black mountains. That means clouds were very huge and black, and they were looking like a black mountains because clouds were becoming bigger and bigger and spreading all around, and says standing in front of me across the sky. That means black clouds were approaching towards him, and then they were in front of him and in front of his plane and across the sky as well, and says I knew I could not fly up and over them, and I did not have enough fuel to fly around them to the north or south. So seeing these monstrous clouds, he became very frightened and got confused because he knew I could not fly up and over them. That means he was not able to fly over the clouds because clouds were very huge, and says I did not have enough fuel to fly around them to the north or south. So why he couldn't fly over the clouds? Because he was running out of the fuel. That means he did not have enough fuel as he was using the last fuel tank, and he was not able to turn his plane towards north or south. So he got confused because he could not see anything in front of him, and clouds were forming like a mountain in front of him. Further he says, I ought to go back to Paris, I thought, but I wanted to get home. So here when he got confused about what to do, then he thought I ought to go back to Paris. That means I should go back to Paris because of the storm. And another thing is he was running out of the fuel, but suddenly he thought that I want to get home. So he decided to move on through the storm and wanted to meet his family anyhow, and wanted to go back to London because he wanted to meet his family, and says I wanted that breakfast, I'll take the risk. I thought, and flew that old Dakota straight into the storm. So finally, he decided to get home and meet his family because he wanted that breakfast with his family. So he wanted to enjoy that good English breakfast with his family and says, I'll take the risk. So that's the risk or risky decision he took when he was flying through the storm, and then he flew that old Dakota straight into the storm. That means he started flying straight towards the storm, but still he was not sure whether he will reach London or not, because in front of him storm was forming just like a mountain. But somehow he wanted to meet his family and have a good English breakfast with them. So in this way he took a dangerous risk to fly towards the storm, and then his plane started moving towards the storm, and says inside the clouds everything was suddenly black. So as soon as he entered inside the black scary clouds, everything was suddenly black. That means it was too dark when his plane entered inside the dark clouds, and everything was black all around him, and there was no light, and he could not see anything, but still his plane was moving forward. Further he says it was impossible to see anything outside the aeroplane. So as we know that he took a dangerous risk to fly through the storm, and when he entered inside the black clouds it was impossible to see anything outside the aeroplane. That means he wanted to see outside, but he could not see anything all around because of the dark clouds were there, and says the old aeroplane jumped and twisted in the air. So later on he felt that his old Dakota aeroplane was jumping little and twisted in the air. That means his plane was not moving at all, and as we know that it was the black cloud storm that he had entered, and so the plane was not steady at all, and it was jumping and twisting in the air. That means his plane turning left and right automatically, and it was just as if it was going to fall. And says I looked at the compass, I couldn't believe my eyes, the compass was turning round and round and round. So when he understood his plane was moving in different directions, immediately he looked at his compass to know more about his current position, in which direction his plane was moving. But then he got surprised and says I couldn't believe my eyes, the compass was turning round and round and round. So when he looked at the compass, something had happened and it was unbelievable, and he saw his compass was just turning round and round and round automatically, and he couldn't understand what was happening with the compass. It was dead, it would not work. So now we got to know that the compass is not functioning well, and after many efforts it did not work, and it was dead, and then he exclaimed that it would not work. So he got frightened about how he would know which direction his aeroplane is flying, because he couldn't see anything forward, and says the other instruments were suddenly dead too. So he started finding other instruments, and whatever instruments were there he used for having contact with the Paris control room, but everything was dead and he couldn't be able to contact the control room for the help, and says I tried the radio, Paris control, can you hear me? So when he got to know that his all instruments is dead, then he tried another way for having contact with the control room, and it was his wireless radio, and then he picked up the radio and spoke out loud, Paris control, can you hear me? So he wanted to get some help from the control room, and says there was no answer, the radio was dead too. That means when he was approaching the control room, can you hear me, but then there was no answer, that means he didn't get any answer from the control room. That means nobody could hear him, and lost all the contact with the control room, and then he understood that his wireless radio is also dead. Further he says I had no radio, no compass, and I could not say where I was. So here, as he was flying inside the black clouds and trying to contact the Paris control room, but nothing is working. That means the radio, compass and other instruments were not working at all, and he was not able to see anything where he was at that time, and says I was lost in the storm. Then in the black clouds quite near me, I saw another aeroplane. So finally he understood that he was lost in the storm and felt as if his aeroplane is going to fall, but something strange had happened, and so he saw something in the black clouds near him, and it was another aeroplane. So it was so dark all around him, but suddenly he saw another aeroplane, and it was flying next to him inside the black clouds, and says it had no lights on its wings, but I could see it flying next to me through the storm. So he saw another aeroplane next to him and says that the aeroplane did not have lights on its wings, but he could see this aeroplane which was flying just next to him inside the storm. Further he says, I could see the pilot's face turned towards me. So here he is saying that he could also see the pilots of that second aeroplane, and he was turning towards me and saying, I was very glad to see another person. So he felt very happy because it was not only he who is caught in the storm. He saw one more aeroplane and there was a pilot also. So he felt very happy that he has company, and says he lifted one hand and waved, follow me, he was saying. So the other aeroplane, there was a pilot sitting inside and he was looking at him. So the fellow lifted his hand, and what did he tell this narrator? He told him, follow me, he knows that I am lost, I thought. So the narrator thought that that person or that aeroplane's pilot has understood that this fellow has lost his direction. So he is asking him to follow him. He is trying to help me. He turned his aeroplane slowly to the north in front of my Dakota so that it would be easier for me to follow him. So here the narrator is saying that he is trying to help me. So who's trying to help him? Another aeroplane pilot was trying to help him to take out from the storm, and saying he turned his aeroplane slowly to the north in front of my Dakota. That means this strange aeroplane's pilot has turned his aeroplane towards the north, and he was just in front of the narrator's aeroplane so that it would be easier for him to follow him. So this strange pilot was trying to help him at that time and waving his hand to follow him so that he could take out of the dark clouds. So still the narrator was facing danger because not knowing where his aeroplane was flying, and even he don't know this strange aeroplane as well, and says, I was very happy to go behind the strange aeroplane like an obedient child. So the narrator is caught inside the dark clouds and storm, but at the same time somebody was there to take him out of the danger, and says, I was very happy to go behind the strange aeroplane like an obedient child. That means he was simply following the instruction given by the strange or unknown pilot, just like an obedient child. So what do you mean by an obedient child? That means child who follows or is willing to do what the parents is told to do. Half an hour, the strange black aeroplane was still there in front of me in the clouds. So here he is saying that the strange pilot was flying his aeroplane in front of him inside the black clouds for half an hour and guiding him where to go or to follow him, and says now there was only enough fuel in the old Dakotas last time to fly for 5 or 10 minutes more. So as he was following another strange aeroplane just like an obedient child which was flying just in front of him, and then he looked at the tank fuel level, and now he understood that aeroplane has only fuel for flying just for 5 or 10 minutes more. So it was a very difficult situation for him to, because he was using the second fuel tank, and even it was the last fuel tank which had only little bit of fuel. So he's saying that only little fuel is left for flying for 5 or 10 minutes more. Further he says, I was starting to feel frightened again. So here, after knowing that the level of fuel tank, he started feeling more frightened again, because aeroplane has only fuel for flying just for 5 or 10 minutes more, and he was thinking that if the fuel tank goes off, he will not be able to land and then aeroplane will crash for sure. So this increased his tension. He started to feel frightened again, and says, but then he started to go down and I followed through the storm. So later on, suddenly he noticed that his black aeroplane which narrator was following started going down and down through the storm. That means this strange aeroplane took him to the landing area of the airport or near the runway, and then he became very happy. And then suddenly I came out of the clouds and saw 2 long straight lines of the lights in front of me. So finally the narrator was able to come out from the dark and huge clouds, and he saw 2 long straight lines of lights in front of him. That means he saw a runway where he had to land his plane. It was a runway, an airport, I was safe. So when he saw 2 straight lines of the runway, he got to know that he has reached at the airport, and then he exclaimed it was a runway, and now he came out of the danger which he was facing and going to land safely, and says, I turned to look for my friend in the black aeroplane, but the sky was empty. So as he was so happy and excited that he has reached the runway, but suddenly he turned to look for my friend in the black aeroplane. That means he looked behind to see the black aeroplane that lead him to took him to this airport, and says, but the sky was empty. That means he wanted to say thank you to the black aeroplane's pilot, but he could not see the aeroplane behind him, and the sky was empty, and says there was nothing there. So he looked everywhere, looked around, looked up, but he could not see the black aeroplane, and says the black aeroplane was gone. I could not see it anywhere. So here the narrator is saying that finally he landed at the airport safely, and now he was no more panicked and frightened, and he understood that the strange aeroplane left him forever. Further he says, I landed and I was not sorry to walk away from the old Dakota near the control tower. So finally he landed at the airport safely, and he did not face any problem while landing, and he is saying that he landed at the airport and there was no trouble, and says he was not sorry to walk away. That means he was able to escape easily from the scary and dangerous storm and black clouds, and he was able to save his life. So later on he started going away from his old Dakota aircraft and moved towards the control tower, and says, I went and asked a woman in the control center where I was and who the other pilot was. So as soon as he landed, he approached toward the control room, and then he saw a woman sitting there and asked her, where is the place and where am I and where is the other pilot? Who was other pilot? So he was talking about the pilot who helped him when he was inside the dark clouds, and says, I wanted to say thank you. So he told the woman that he was looking for the other pilot because he wanted to thank you that pilot. She looked at him very strangely and then laughed. So here the narrator is saying that she looked at me very strangely. That means a woman gave him a very strange look and then laughed. So while looking at him strangely, he started looking at him because he asked her who was flying another aeroplane and wanted to thank him, and says, another aeroplane up there in the storm? No other aeroplanes were flying tonight. So while laughing, the woman asked him another aeroplane up in the storm. So she asked him, why are you asking for another aeroplane, and said there was no another aeroplane were flying in the sky tonight, and says yours was the only one I could see on the radar. So she told him that you are the only one who was flying the aeroplane, and there was no another aeroplane was flying, and said I could see on the radar. So she told him that even I could see on the radar that there was only one aeroplane was flying in the sky. So what do you mean by radar? Radar is a system that uses radio waves for finding the position of moving aeroplanes or ships, and used for tracking fighter jets and other aeroplanes, etc. So she was very sure that there was no aeroplane except his aircraft. Further he says, so who helped me to arrive there safely without a compass or a radio and without any more fuel in my tanks? So after getting the answer from a woman who was sitting inside the control room made him puzzled and confused, and then he started asking himself questions. Who was the pilot and who helped him when all the instruments were not working at all, and even when he was in a very dangerous situation, or when the fuel tank was running out of the fuel, and when he was in a very difficult situation, and says, who was the pilot on the strange black aeroplane flying in the storm without lights? So he was also thinking that who was the person or pilot on the strange black aeroplane flying in front of him, and says, where is the black strange aeroplane which had no lights on its wing in front of him? So this lesson talks about the self-confidence and keeping hope. So the narrator had a strong determination that he would want to reach his family and have a good English breakfast with them, and he never decided to go back to Paris and wanted to reach his family anyhow, having English good breakfast with them. So this is the end of the chapter. I hope you like the video. For more informative videos, do subscribe my channel, hit the bell icon so that you get notified whenever new video will be uploaded. So thank you so much for watching once again. Stay safe, stay healthy.